Welcome to the bizval podcast. At bizval, we are passionate about empowering entrepreneurs the world over to understand and unlock the value in their business. We work with advisors and entrepreneurs to demystify the value creation process when building a business. At bizval, we know how tough it is to grow and run a business, which is exactly why we've made valuations simple to understand, accurate, and affordable. Our unique blend of tech and touch ensures that you always receive the best service, authentic human engagement, and data-led insights to ensure that you build a business that provides you with freedom and choice. In the bizval podcast, we showcase stories of real entrepreneurs and advisors, sharing lessons and inspiration from their journeys to make your journey just that little bit easier.
And today I'm really excited for this conversation. I'm joined by Mark Taylor, who's the CEO of Cala Capital Africa. That's only kind of the tip of the iceberg. So Cala currently specializes in sourcing private capital in the mid-market, so $10 million to $100 million companies, and a particular focus on African investment opportunities. So that's the dry version of the intro. I'm going to welcome you first, Mark, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about you. So welcome to the show, Mark.
Thanks very much, Graham. Really appreciate it.
Okay, so some of you might have heard the name, and Mark's got a very unusual and varied CV, from venture capital to running parts of Remgro, Richemont, turnaround CEO. He developed one of Turkey's first giant public aquariums. He's a surfer, business rescue practitioner, and I think the thing that kind of stood out the most, and a swimmer, master swimmer. But the thing that stood out for me when I first met Mark is he was the manager of the Springbok Nude Girls. So basically, from being a manager of a rock band all the way to being a venture capitalist. Mark, I think we're gonna, we could be here for days, but let's start. Let's start right at the beginning and tell us a little bit about your upbringing. Your early journey, your early start to life.
Thanks so much, Graham. And I suppose I was born in Cyprus on a British military airbase when my dad was a dentist with the Royal Air Force. So I grew up there as a little kid. We were English, so we moved to England and lived in Suffolk for some years. And then finally, he decided he wanted to replicate the sun, rugby, and sea of Cyprus. And we ended up in Durban. And he had a choice, interestingly, between going to Durban or going to Camps Bay. And it wasn't even a thought process in his head at the time. He went to Durban. And in retrospect, I mean, it's an intriguing thought. But in those days, Cape Town was sort of the country cousin. And Durban was the place to be. The Durban port was booming, the sugar industry was booming. So we came to Durban, and it's occurred to me occasionally that what it would have been like if we'd been in Camps Bay. Maybe I'd have learned to cope with cold water, but that's what happened. So we came out here in '69, and most of my life I spent in Durban. So
I mean, I don't know whether it was the warmer water at that point or the friendlier people, and perhaps you wouldn't have been who you are. All the Camps Bay people are going to be up in arms now. But I think I think that obviously grounded you. I mean, Durban, as you say, for our international listeners, is a melting pot city. It's vibrant, it's colorful, it's energetic. And you grew up in that environment, but also the people are down to earth and humble. So you grew up in that environment. How do you think that shaped you? I mean, so you obviously came as a kid, and that was all you knew. But do you think that upbringing, grounded you in terms of who you are?
Perhaps it did. I mean, I've discovered I'm much more of an aquatic person than most other things. I mean, I played a lot of rugby and quite seriously.
Yeah.
But I did a lot of serious martial arts, competed nationally. But my main passion has typically been around the sea, and I think the Durban waters are warmer. And if you think back on it in those days, again, if I think back to the days when, I mean, these were days when the Natal, in those days it was the Natal province, dominated all the aquatic sports in the country. And I think at a stage I thought we were quite special. But the reason we were special was not because we were special. It was because we lived in a warm climate where you had an extra month on either side of the season to train. And so we were always better prepared than the guys in Cape Town, not because they weren't good swimmers, but they had to swim in much
Yeah.
colder water. And so, you can easily confuse, as I learned from my a former boss, that never confuse luck with genius. And so I think that probably had an impact. But I went to Stellenbosch to study when I'd finished my schooling in Durban. I went to Stellenbosch to study in the days, in 79 actually, in the days when people who spoke English didn't go in a hurry. And
Yeah.
I went down there because I wanted to play rugby. I didn't tell people that because I didn't, I wasn't very big. But I went down there because I really, really wanted to go and play rugby in Stellenbosch. So I studied
And
law there.
so you could be somebody who's sort of like the convention and pushes yourself outside of your comfort zone. You've worked in South Africa, you're born in Cyprus, been in the Netherlands, Turkey, the UK. I mean, and for most people, that's already a lot. But have you always been someone, Mark, who's been comfortable, kind of challenging the status quo, working outside of your comfort zone?
I was diagnosed much later in my life with ADHD. I'm not sure if we all have some kind of ADHD. I suspect so, but I'm easily distracted, and if I want to do stuff that I'm going to be good at, I need to be really absorbed by it. I don't do
Mm,
boring, and I'm not. And I want to say that I don't do boring. I don't mean it in some kind of sort of grand sense. But I've just been working on my tax. It's lying around me here. I've been working on my tax with my accountant. He will tell you that I cannot stand working with that kind of stuff. Much rather see a
mm.
massive problem and go and try and fix it. That interests me and excites me. So yeah, I suspect that takes me into pushing boundaries. I've tried to consider. Yeah, I think it has. It takes me into a space where I do like to test myself.
I mean, I've recently come across the concept of a polymath, which I'm not sure if you know what that is, and it's somebody who basically is able to join the dots and not just become a jack of all trades, but actually a master of a lot of different things. And what you're describing actually resonates quite strongly with that. You don't just do something for the sake of doing it. You kind of find something that grabs you and you become not just proficient, you become skillful in it. And talking about your background,
Yeah.
whether it's your swimming, your surfing, your martial arts, business, everything you focus on, you put your heart and soul into it, and then you get bored and you move on to something else. I mean, that would probably be a fairly good description, right?
It is actually, and I think by the time there's a little bit of Dunning-Kruger involved, right? So I go and I work on an aquarium. I developed that aquarium in Turkey. We
Yeah,
pulled it off. We made money out of it. It was a successful. We had 1 million human beings come through that aquarium in Istanbul, a country that's got 3,000 years of history, more complexity than you can ever imagine,
yeah.
that was a success. So I finished that role, and then the other aquarium roles popped up, and I said, "Whoa, hold on a second! I now know the problems. I don't want to do that again." So then I roll into the next thing and go and discover new problems in new businesses because nothing is really that as easy as you ever think it is.
Yeah, yeah.
But you made a comment I just wanted to come back to because I think there's a message in it that I think is really interesting. You talked about the idea of what is actually, I suppose, transdisciplinary thinking. And I think I will tell you that of the things I've done, and I've studied extensively, I think I've got, as soon as you've got more letters after your name than in your name, I think you're an academic. So I'm probably a bit of an academic, but
And you've got a pretty short name, Mark, so that's not going to take much.
no, even if you include my middle names, even if you include those, I've got there's a lot of letters after it, and it's not because it's because I think I'm inherently interested in things and curious. I'm also aware that I'm not as smart as I'd like to think I was, and so studying helps that process. And if I think back on all of the things I ever studied. In 2017, I went to the Stellenbosch Business School and I studied futures. and not as in financial futures. I did that when I did my MCOM, but I focused on futures thinking and futurism, and it was an absolutely revelationary experience. It was a pivotal intellectual period of my life, and this I was in my late 50s. And so I think the thing about it was, to go back to your thought on transdisciplinary thinking, it's not interdisciplinary, that's between disciplines, right? It's being able to overview and look at many things. And that intrigued me because when I grew up as a young lawyer working in practice, there were ways you did things. When I started working with finance, and I started seeing things in balance sheets, it's two-dimensional. You know, you make a change of formula there, and an answer comes out there. It's two-dimensional, and a lot of the experience I'd had through my career as I was learning and was that isn't how the world works. You know, people say, "Oh, if you do this, then that." Well, if you press a light switch, light will go on. But you can often think that, oh, well, if I sue them, they'll back down. Or if I sue them, they'll know who's boss, or whatever it is. But that's a different game. That's a complex game. As soon as you start to deal with humans in a bounded setting, humans that are going to make their own automated sort of decisions, they're also their own decisions, and can communicate fast, you have complexity. And in this course, I started to see the world as I understood it. And finally, I went, gee, so this is what I've always thought. And in my late 50s, I discovered a way of thinking about the world that I had not known existed. I mean, futurism has now, since even over the last 10 years since I studied it, become a lot more commonplace. People talk about complexity and complexity theory and systems thinking. But the truth is that it was absolutely a revolutionary experience for me. And so, yeah, by your story, and I do think that your curiosity about many things is a valuable thing. You can get distracted, but it's a valuable thing.
Yeah, and I think just before we move on, I think there's an important point here. Often people, and we do a lot of work in the US, and the US is a hyper specialized economy. You can do capital raising in this market for these types of people and this, what have you. And you go outside of those bounds and people battle to classify you. And the other thing we often see in business is, to be successful, you need to focus. So sometimes when you talk the way you talk, people immediately think you're jack of all trades, master of none, and you're kind of like distracted. And I think the superpower that you talk about there is actually you think in a certain way. Let's call it systems thinking. Okay. But when you apply yourself to something, you apply yourself wholly and focus on that thing for a discrete portion of time to allow you to get mastery in that. And I think that's certainly, been one of your superpowers, and continues to be a superpower, I guess, Mark, is that systems thinking together with focus is something which is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I'll say this. We've all heard the aphorisms about business. You must you need to be tough and resilient if you're an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
But you also need to fail fast.
Yeah.
So which one do you do? That's where wisdom comes in. That's where the ability to see the bigger picture comes in. So everyone's got an aphorism, and they'll throw it out. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. With
Yeah.
respect, that's nonsense. You can't
Yeah.
you can't measure culture, but my goodness, if you
Yeah.
don't manage it, your business is in trouble. So
Yeah.
values. You can't measure values, but if you don't have values,
Yeah.
so
You're in
I'm
trouble.
I'm not a big I'm quite skeptical about a lot of accepted wisdom about things like that, and I think the idea of being able to appreciate that if you have a complex problem, there's no such thing as a simple solution. If it's
Yeah.
a wicked problem, and someone says, "Oh, this can be solved with this," giving you a simple answer. Well, maybe you should just go back to being a spreadsheet jockey, where you
Yeah.
put a formula in and you get an answer.
Yeah.
Because the
The
world
world.
doesn't work like that. The world
Yeah.
I mean, not whether you're dealing with messy humans. The soft stuff in life
Agreed.
Soft stuff in life is the hard stuff. The hard stuff,
Mm.
like learning how to. I just came from spending 3 days with Eskom, learning how to trade energy, and they're running a school
Yeah.
on how to trade energy in the new South African wholesale energy markets, which will be being launched during April. The most fascinating thing. I thought Eskom. You sit there and you go, oh, God, this guy's a dimwit. They're kidding. All that load shedding. You have no idea how complex a grid is. It is. I think it's been described before as the most complex machine on earth. Is managing a grid
Yeah.
where everything changes at the speed of light. And I
Mm.
found so I think it's an important part of the process. Again, to go back to your point, it's a hyper focus as well. If I get involved in
Yeah.
something, I want to understand right down to the dirty end of it, not
Mm.
frivolous. I want to understand the dirty stuff.
Absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to shift gears a little bit. We're going to go back to
Mm,
your story, and for those of you who grew up in South Africa, I guess in the 80s, 90s, maybe even the early noughties. You hear the letters SNG or Springbok Nude Girls, and they were absolutely legendary in their time. So it's not often that you get to speak to, a former manager of a legendary rock band. So let's dive a little bit into that period. I mean, yeah, Shane, how did that even come about, Mark? And I'd love to hear some of the sort of stories along there. What did that teach you about business, about people, that sort of phase of your life?
I've always been passionate about music. I'm not a musician. I cannot play an instrument. I can't even dance. I've got no rhythm and I've got no skill at playing an instrument. If I focused on it, I might be able to play chopsticks, but nothing beyond that, I don't think. It's just one area that I'm aware of my limitations. But gee, I love listening to music. And I had at one stage actually ran the radio station in Stellenbosch, Radio Marti. And I was the Hoof Omroeper, and which is, there's a whole bunch of stories around there that are quite funny. But the real thing was, I went with a buddy of mine, Gerard, and we went to go, and he said to me, Mark, you've got to come and watch this band. And I just got back from the Netherlands, moved back to
Yeah.
Stellenbosch to work. I was working as Johann Rupert's assistant at the time. And I thought, well, let me go along. And we saw an attic with 30 people on a Sunday evening was this band playing. And I watched this band playing. I was mesmerized. I've never seen anything like this. I've seen a bit of live music. I've been to the Melkweg a few times in Amsterdam, and it was mind-boggling to see what these guys were doing. So I thought to myself, sure, that's amazing. And Gerard said, Mark, why don't we going to offer to manage them? These guys look like they need some help. So I said, look, I don't know anything about music management. But he said, Mark, you know music and you know management, music management. So there we were. As stupid as that. I mean, again, bumbling my way into a Dunning-Kruger event. Oh, it can't be difficult.
It's called
Um,
chutzpah.
so, in fact, I actually cleared it with Johan because it was a hobby. We did it as a hobby, and we didn't do it to make money. We did it because we just I loved the guys. They were the most fascinating group of fives, and their music was gorgeous. And I loved the wall of sound that they would play. Just absolute wall of sound and the quirky, crazy, wild stuff that was going on stage. It was frenetic. And so we pitched to them. We had a chat, and I remember sitting talking to Theo, the lead guitarist, and him sitting with his feet on the table, tuning his guitar, looking at me, just like dissing us. What could you bring to us? And funny enough, they were actually also looking for a manager at the time, but he was playing the game well. And then we disappeared because it seemed like they were all sorted out, and then they weren't, and then they called us, and we went to start working with them. And basically, Gerard Goos lives in Stellenbosch. We were old varsity mates, and we basically ran I suppose, ran the business side of it for them. And eventually, what happened was it became too demanding, and we had some guys who ran the road shows, the tours, took the roadies and went and toured. And eventually, we brought a guy in Franny who actually ran really effectively. I suppose I moved into more like a chairmanship role.
Yeah.
Gerard was I suppose almost a vice chairman because we worked together, but I had the relationship with the music with the record company, which gave me a little edge in that pecking order, I guess. But and Franny was effectively the CEO. I mean, he executed, and we helped work on a strategy, and it was an amazing experience, and in the sense that I could not believe the creative genius that was coming out of the Boerland. And in fact, it's funny. It was a funny time in our history. All through the 80s, it had been very repressed. The Nude Girls first got together in about 94. We linked up with them in 95, and they just finished their first album. They'd had I think they'd sold about 372 copies of it. And we got involved with them at the time. And there was it was almost like as the elections took place in April 94, it was like a release. And the amount of amazing Afrikaans music and musicians who were Afrikaans who were singing in English as well, who were starting to perform music, and it was almost like someone had taken the lid off the pressure cooker and said, "You guys come out and express yourself. We're free. You can do stuff." Now, I'm sure a lot of people of color will have their own experiences about that lid coming off and how they experienced it. But my piece of experience of it was to watch this musical development amongst white Afrikaners. I mean, why would they be doing that? But they did. So that was great. And then we signed them. We actually we ran the only time I think that I knew at the time certainly that we ran an auction with all 5 record companies. And we went out to all of them and said, "Here's the pitch. Bring us your quotes. Bring us your." And by this stage, the band had an amazing following. We had a website that had nearly as many visitors as I think Amazon at the time, because I was also a venture capitalist eventually during this process. And we were watching all of the numbers. And it was because, and I thought, again, never confuse luck with genius. I thought, you are so clever. Look, there are 50,000 hits a month. In those days, in the mid-90s, this was like astonishing. And then I sat down and I had a look at it and I went, hang on a second. Our website name is nudegirls.coza. And all the visitors are coming into the gallery.
I can see where this is going.
And then they leave. so they weren't coming to look at the music. They thought this was a porn site. But we were a little bit how can I say circumspect about mentioning this to the record companies when we went up. But we did say, look, we're getting 50,000 or might have been 20,000, but it was an astonishing number of hits. So that was quite interesting. I'll tell you the other thing. I went out to try and register the name Springbok for Springbok Nude Girls. I wanted to register the trademark Springbok Nude Girls. You know that we got beaten by 2 months to get the name Springbok by SARU. Can you believe the South African Rugby Union? We nearly gazumped them. I nearly owned the Spring. Well, the band. I mean, I was working for the band. So funny, some funny stuff that happened. And I will tell you, if you want to get into complex law, music law, the number of rights, every song, the amount of the rights that relate to it, the artist, the performers, the writers, the publisher, it's the needle time. You cannot believe how complicated it is. Anyway, I worked extensively with a guy called Mark Rosen on that, and he has become a friend, and he sat on the other side, and he was the leading media lawyer in the country, and we got a good deal.
I think we would have to have a fireside chat just about those years. You could fill out a whole evening, I guess. I guess there's a few stories which are probably best shared around a fire and not on a podcast.
Well, I'll tell you that there was such a nice bunch of guys, so nice and well behaved, that the guy, the senior guy at the record company guy, said to me, "Mark, we're going to have to go into the hotel rooms, and chuck the TVs in the swimming pool because these guys are just too nice. They were always yes, man, yes, sir, and incredibly. But if the record company said, "Could you please produce something a bit more commercial?" My goodness, then all the niceness stopped. So, and we protected the creativity of the band
Yeah.
violently. I mean, because and some of the stuff I look back on it, some of the stuff was not as good as it could have been. But I think what we wanted to do was we just felt that these guys were like geniuses, and that's what I learned about early stage business. When you're dealing with geniuses who started up a business, you got to fan those flames. You got to work with the guys who are wanting to develop themselves, and you have to trust their instinct. Otherwise, what I can't play an instrument. I'm not going to stand up on stage and look like. I mean, I can't look like Honor, not in a million years.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a big piece of that. But I will tell you one thing, just one final piece of it. The song Blue Eyes is probably one of them, probably I think one of the great, if I take one of the five greatest rock songs written in the country, out of this country, it would include things like Weeping by Bright Blue, but it would include Blue Eyes. And Blue Eyes was interesting because it's this beautiful love song to a daughter, a father to a daughter. Now, my daughter was 2 at the time, and she had blue eyes.
Sure.
We're driving up to the
Wow.
studio after I'd been working with Johann on some stuff, and I get up there and I walk out and I say, "Hey, Honor, that is," and I've been listening to the tapes because these are all raw tapes from the day before, and I was going up so I could listen and go back. And not that I had much input to give because, as I said, I'm not a musician, but I would go back and speak to them about it. And I said to Honor, what's that song Blue Eyes about? It's like a love song to a daughter, but it's quite strange as well. There's something about it that's very captivating. And he just said to me, "Mark, gesinsmoord, family murder."
Oh.
And it was about the little girl who remains. This is tragic stuff. The stuff in the Afrikaans community is a very high percentage of people who commit family murder. A lot of it's around shame and not wanting to, apparently. I mean, I would love to say I knew about it, and they will take the whole family out before they kill themselves. And the song in Blue Eyes is, "You might take it out of here. Once I've killed you, I can kill myself." And when you hear it like that, that song is a devastating song. And so, of course, the question became with Honor. So, Honor, did she make it? And when I was asked him, when I was standing here with my 2-year-old in my arms, and he goes, "No, she doesn't make it."
Sure.
And then we did a documentary some while later, and he'd had a little kid, and they asked him the same question in the documentary. This is like 20 years later, and he said, "No, she made it."
Yeah, yeah.
I said, "Honor, you traitor! You didn't. That's not what you told me." He said, "Mark, I've had a child. How can I kill
Change my
it?"
mind.
So it was but yeah, again, that was the beauty of what I was working with. I felt it was incredibly privileged to work with guys like that. Fantastic human beings.
I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, not a lot of people get to have those kind of experiences. They live their whole lives, and that you truly lived through that period. But I want to move to a different part, and I guess some of these, I'm not going chronologically. Some of these things, I guess, happened in parallel. But you were also very fortunate to have worked with some of the, I'd say, leading industrialists and business people entrepreneurs. So you spent some time, I guess, as Johann Rupert's right-hand man, I suppose, at Richemont. That must have been a fascinating time and some really unique and rare exposure. Tell us a little bit about that time, Mark.
Yeah, look, I mean, firstly, I'll be circumspect about it out of respect for Johann and for the family. It was an incredibly special time, but it was incredibly tough. Johann is demanding. He is scintillatingly clever, really smart guy and strategically savvy, and can be tough as hell when he needs to be, and he can be very human when he needs to be. But it was an environment where I think, I felt I was holding on to the tail of a bull, as everything moved forward. It was an interesting time. I mean, to work with a person like that at a level that he works at, and people say to me, "Oh, Mark, as if Johann is my bosom pal and we do a lot of work together." The business I do in my life doesn't even it's not the kind of stuff that Johan does. I'm operating in, we might raise $50 million for a business. That's a big deal for us. In Johan's life, that's a rounding error. So I don't mean it dismissively or anything like that, but the guy operates at an amazing level. So what was interesting though, let me tell you what was interesting for me though, that was related to that. When the job was offered to me, and I was in the Netherlands at the time, and I had an idea I was going to move to London, and we were going to live in London, and Johan said, no, we're coming back to South Africa. I called up Cliffy Elphick, and Cliffy at the time had just finished his stint for the Oppenheimers, for Harry O, as his assistant, in the same sort of role. Now, in every sort of family office or setting where you've got a very powerful family, the roles are different. So there's no standard role for being an assistant to somebody. So I wasn't always sometimes I was making important decisions for Johann, but quite often I was simply carrying a bag into the room and writing down notes and being the skivvy. So that's just what it is. But I said to Cliffy, I've been offered this role. What do you think? Is it a dead end? Where does it go career-wise? What happens? He said, Mark, it is the most amazing opportunity, but there's one thing you must be aware of. You live in the reflected glory of your principal. And if you can't cope when you finally step away from that role, if you cannot cope with the fact that people have lost interest in you, don't take the job. And that was he was right, by the way. When I finished working with Johann, even though I was still within the group, and at the time I was working with Dilly and Yanni at Venfin, running the new investment evaluations there. The fact that I'd worked for Johann was helpful, but people, I was seen as an access point, and I was a gateway. I had to be a gatekeeper. So it did happen, and I have to say to anyone who is sitting in a big company thinking they're going to change the world when they go on their own. When I finally the final chink was when I finished the turnaround I did for Johann in Durban. I said to Yanni I wanted to take a year off. I didn't want to do anything. I'm so sick of human beings by that stage because it was so difficult. And I decided not to go back to Stellenbosch. And then I started stepping out a bit on my own as an entrepreneur. And without the big balance sheet, without the big brand name behind you, people don't take you seriously unless you've proven yourself. And I hadn't proven myself as an entrepreneur. And then probably it's why I ended up in Turkey, because no one knew me there anyway. So, so I could do something unusual.
I mean, it's a fascinating backstory. I mean, as you say, you've worked with geniuses in different fields. I know from the Nude Girls. I mean, you've worked with you had and I guess as somebody, as you described earlier, who's got this ferocious appetite for learning and getting bored with things easily. Okay, so now you've got bored with two geniuses already. Now you're going out on your own.
No, I will confess, I'm never bored I'm not bored
I'm just teasing.
by either of them. And certainly, rather strangely, Johann and I found each other again when I graduated from my future studies course in 2017. He was doing the capping of all the students, and I happened to be. I graduated there. Fortunately, I didn't do too badly in the course, so I wasn't. But it was quite fun to see him in that setting.
So let's talk a little bit. I mean, again, we're probably gonna have to have a follow-up podcast, Mark. But I want to talk about two things. You touched on it earlier. So, the global aquariums in Turkey. Just for our listeners, maybe you can just share, the story behind that, how that came about, and then I want to just spend a few minutes talking about Cala Capital, what you're doing now, and why that's important. So, let's quickly talk about the Turkey experience. So, you moved to Turkey. Take it from there.
Yeah, and again, I did everything wrong, right? I'd never done a development. I'd never been to Turkey. I knew nothing about aquariums or fish. So what do? I developed the first
There's a
aquarium
bit of
in
a
Turkey.
pattern for me here by the sounds
There's a
of things.
pattern. Dunning-Kruger strikes me hard and disciplines me every time, and I now know how much can go wrong in an aquarium because at one stage we owned €1 million of fish that swam around in that aquarium. Man, if you get a disease, you get bloom in that water, and it sucks the oxygen out of the water, and those fish die. So I did. So I was at the time. I just I was taking my year off, and I got a call from my wife's cousin in London, and he said, "Mark," and he's quite a controversial and active in the political sphere, Rob Hersot. So Rob is my wife's cousin. So Rob said, "Mark, we got to do something in Turkey. I've seen an opportunity. Why don't we have a look at it?" I said, "Rob, it sounds like a nuts idea. I'm not going anywhere near it. I'll consult you though." And it moved from consulting very quickly into a full-blown role because I actually realized it was really interesting. It was challenging as all hell, and it was interesting. So I took that role on, and we in fairness, it was a financial instrument. And now this is a dreadful thing to say because what we worked out was we could get very high gearing from the New Zealand government for a New Zealand exporter of an aquarium to export that aquarium to Turkey. So the aquarium got sold, I mean in pieces, but it got sold. And for that, the Export Credit Agency in New Zealand, we became their first client, and we raised capital off the back of an 80% guarantee from the New Zealand government, without which we could not have done it. It meant that when we went to the entrepreneurs and said to them, not the entrepreneurs, sorry, the investors, and Rob went out to his rather amazing Rolodex and said, "Hey, would you be interested?" The family offices who put their hands up to come in knew that they were only putting in 20% of the risk capital, and there was no risk on the 80% of the gearing. So it was really an upside only option. And we were playing the lira against the euro because at that stage it looked like Turkey was going to move into the EU. So I went for the euro. As it turned out, Turkey never did. But it was a highly leveraged option with an underline that just happened to be an aquarium in Istanbul, which I had to build and develop and work on, and in fact run for a period of time. And I can only say this much: Turkey, Istanbul was the most fantastic place to be. I loved working with Turkish people. I did not do what everyone told me to do as usual, and that was you must get yourself a local partner. I did not get a local partner. I treated my landlord as my local partner because we were 90% aligned. We had the same interests, other than when we were negotiating on the lease terms, and I was committed to Turkey. I tried to learn the language. I tried to understand what it was like. It's a very secular type of Islam that they practice. So it's an easy, comfortable environment to operate in. And I was very committed to it. I loved the place, and we built the aquarium, put 1 million people through it, and then sold it a few years later to the biggest aquarium owner in the world, who owns Madame Tussauds, the London Eye,
Wow.
Legoland, all of those assets, and we sold it to them. And I made great friends out of that. I've made along the way lots of friends in these processes. But a lot of funny stories about an aquarium. I will tell you some really funny
And then,
stories about
but I mean, in summary, actually, to start, it was all about financial arbitrage and derivatives. Aquarium just happened to be the vehicle. But I think beneath all of that, actually, there was substance, there was real stuff. And yeah, as you're chatting, a lot of this is about, people say business is about risk and reward, but it's also about, luck and timing. and also having the mindset of seeing opportunity. So if you're somebody who is curious and you're looking for that, you would see that kind of opportunity if you had the sort of um, the perspective that you do. And I don't think it's just coincidental. Luck's probably a bad word. It's being open to
Yeah.
seeing these opportunities and then pursuing them.
And you had a city of 18 million human beings. I mean, this was back
Yeah,
in 2007 when we first went there. 18
yeah.
million people with no aquarium. And in
That's
Tokyo, which is
Johannesburg, Durban, Cape Town, Port Elizabeth, Pretoria combined.
yeah,
It's
no,
massive. Yeah,
it's enormous. And if you
yeah,
think how many aquariums are in those various cities, there's a number of them. So it was screaming out. Once we sat down and did the numbers, it was screaming for an aquarium. And there was a government aquarium that had failed, and it had been put into, they'd mothballed it. And the minute we opened and they saw what was going on through our doors, they demothballed it and started
yeah.
competing with us. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's how it
I think the
works.
thing that it wasn't just a financial arbitrage. There was actually a real need and a real opportunity. And I think that's
Absolutely.
the thing when it comes to effective derivatives, there's got to be a real underpinning need. If that's not there, there's no substance. So it's about triangulating those two. And that's where the opportunity lies. Mark, so we're going to have a little last section here, and then I'm going to ask you just a few what we call sort of rapid fire questions. But I want to give you an opportunity just to talk a little bit about Cala Capital. So that's where you invest most of your time and energy now. So if you could just share a little bit about what is Cala Capital, what are you trying to do, and why is it important to you right now?
Thanks. So Graham, I think Cala Capital, and if you're that way inclined, Cala Capital, because it has a meaning behind it that is relevant in our lives. And that is that we play a neutral role. We used to be known as New Capital, and the neutral role is, I suppose, manifest in the term ingatati kala, which is a Xhosa word, Xhosa expression to say not to take a side. So we try to sit in the middle of investors and paying clients. And the way we started out was I wanted to know the mandate and know every single financial investor in the world who's prepared to write a check of $5 million to $50 million in Africa. Now, that's a finite number. It's a big number, and it's very hard to get your hands around it. And no one knows what that number really is. But I'm going to guess a couple of thousand. And that includes local investors as well who can write checks, and that can be debt or equity, doesn't matter. And we started speaking to people, and I will say that I have had conversations with probably now pushing closer to 2,000, but certainly by after the first 6 years, 1,500 unique investors. And we trimmed that down to about 500 investors who we felt fulfilled. They were really serious about Africa. It wasn't just on there. We're in the MENA zone, MENA area, and then it's tacked on as the A on the MENA. There was commitment. We wanted to know they were clean. We were a bit wary about the sort of there's a lot of dirty money out floating around, so you've got to be careful of it. And we built up an amazing network and database of investors. And so the idea was then, or to create efficiency, was to work with capital seekers and say, right, we probably know the 5 people who will invest in your business. You need to speak to 7. And anyone who tells you you need to speak to 50 is an idiot. That was our pitch. Okay. Having said that, I've sometimes come up with 50 names, but the point was really that we wanted to be super accurate and not waste people's time with lousy deals. So we would vet the deals. We'd know pretty much who would invest in them, and we had the relationships, and that's the secret sauce. And people have seen the quality of transactions we take to them, and typically, when someone comes to us and pays us money to help prepare them for the market, and then build a documentation, data room, and take them to market to raise capital. When we go out to the investors will respond. I mean, I did a transaction for for a subsidiary of a former company I worked for. No guessing. And we went out with to about 30 investors on the day we launched the deal. Within 24 hours, we had over half of the investors we'd spoken to were already looking at the data room and had signed NDAs. That is moving at speed of light, when you think about how long it can take. Now, that's not to say every deal works like that, but that's the idea behind it. So we do sometimes do strategic work in the strategic space, but the problem with strategic investors is that typically they are looking for control. So that's a particular mindset. And very often, they're only looking for one specific kind of deal. So where we were working with financial investors, we know, it's a DFI or it's a sovereign wealth fund or it's a bank or a credit fund, you start to see the patterns and be able to, and the guys know you. And then what we found is because it's become relevant in an AI setting, can't someone else just go and find all the names of investors that invest in Africa privately? Well, you can. So what use is that? You need a relationship. You need to know what's going on, and that's the missing thing. So that's what we try to do. And as we've grown and changed and morphed, what we've done is we've done other stuff. I mean, we noticed at the end of 22 that the limited partners weren't investing in the general partners. We used to do fund advisory to funds. And for a short while, it didn't work that well for us. And we noticed the limited partners weren't putting money into the general partners. So we went, trouble's coming. Money is going to dry up in South Africa or in Africa. So we turned to restructuring, and that's when I dusted off a business rescue practitioner license. And lo and behold, within about 3 months, we had our first business rescue. So that was so we morph and move a little bit with the opportunities. We've done a lot of work working with UK government. We did work in the old days with USAID, where we helped largely facilitating the movement of capital around Africa. And our mission was really, if people are going to put money into Africa, please just put them into good deals. And let us we can be a vessel for that. And that was our mission really, is to try and help, try and ensure that the little bit of capital we get given to us on this continent, it goes into proper deals, not politically motivated and I don't know, scoundrel deals and stuff like that, or dreamer deals. It goes into real stuff that's going to make a difference to Africa. So that's kind of been our mission.
And Mark, it's fascinating. I mean, and we're going to have to kind of close out on that. But I think, as you've shared your story, there can be few people who are as well placed as you in terms of your background, the building of relationships, the sort of identifying patterns, and also a passion to really do good and make sure that things have a real impact. I think your past journey and where you are now, and let me get the click right. I did study isiXhosa at school, so Cala Capital. There we go. It's brought you to this point, and I think you're making a difference. It's not just sourcing and channeling funds. It's actually making sure that the right funds are deployed in the right way to make a genuine impact, and obviously make a bit of money along the way. I mean, we are in business after all.
Yeah.
So I love that story. In conclusion, I'm going to ask you 4 or 5 quick rapid fire questions, and then I'm going to give you an opportunity just to share any closing insights. And if you're up for it, I think we may have to have a follow-up podcast, because it's just so much that we didn't even get to. But let's just start with some quick questions. Top of mind, stream of consciousness answer. What's the biggest mistake founders make when raising capital?
The biggest mistake is they're not investor ready when they think they are.
Yeah, we see that too. It's you think a good idea is enough. You've got to be investor ready. What do investors fear the most? And let me frame that in terms of investing in Africa in particular. What's the biggest fear for investors?
So let me say what my partner said, my business partner at Cala, Gordon. He said when he was at Barclays, he said, if you stood more chance of losing your job if you lost £1 in Nigeria than if you lost £10 million in South Africa. Because people would say, I told you so about Nigeria. It's a difficult place to do business. So what do they fear? They fear looking like chumps and making a bad decision based on things that they should probably have known otherwise.
Sure. That's a really good insight. What do you think, if you had to pin one thing, what creates long-term value?
Long-term value is created by institutionalizing your business so that you are completely replaceable.
We
I mean,
talk
there's
about
other things too, but that's top of mind,
yeah,
my biggest issue.
systems, processes, and no owner dependence ultimately. Yeah. What is the hardest decision that you've had to make over the last 40 odd years?
Laying off my CEO of my aquarium, who is a big bear of a man, a Serbian guy, most fantastic human being. I had to lay him off as part of our sales transaction, and he was in intensive care at the time, having had a heart attack. That was the hardest thing I've done. And look, we looked after him, and we didn't. It wasn't lightly done, but that was brutal.
Yeah, I mean, I can see, Mark, I mean, one of the things that we've gotten to know each other, you've got a genuine heart for people, but it doesn't mean you don't have to do tough things. And yeah,
Yeah.
that's tough. Um, Last question is what's one trait that all the great CEOs that you've met and worked with, you think they share?
I don't know what they share, but I know what I'd like to think they share. And that is a level of, even if it's internalized and they don't always project it, of epistemic humility. They have, they know what they think is right may not be right. And I think that's a trait of successful people. But I can't say I don't know if that's a trait of all of entrepreneurs I know that's driving it. You need to be curious and you be careful about it's the things that we are certain about that trip us up in life, not the things we are uncertain about.
Yeah, I love that. Mark, before we wrap, I want to give you the opportunity, anybody who's been listening in today, like what would one final advice be to a listener? They could be an entrepreneur, it could just be somebody who's curious about business listening on the show. What's your closing piece of advice or wisdom for our listeners?
I often hear that you must follow your passion. I'm not convinced about that. Quite often, you do stuff you have to do so you can follow your passion. And you're very fortunate if it turns out that you're in a business where it is your passion. So I would say to people, in a world that's become a world of instant gratification, you have to know how to play a long game, and you have to be prepared to ensure that you're just to ensure that you're tough. You can be tough through that journey.
Yeah, and I guess that talks to all these things like resilience and having a clear purpose and all. That's what enables you to play the long game, right? So you don't just
It,
fall
it
away at the
does, but then
first breath of
again,
wind that comes. Yeah.
no, exactly. But then again, sometimes you got to know I could be wrong. Maybe it's time to fold the cards. And the
Yeah.
guy always holds, always holds. You soon see them on around the card table.
You have to make a good poker player. Yeah. Mark, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you today. If any of our listeners want to reach out to you, what's the best way to contact you?
They can find me on LinkedIn, or they can contact me on mark.taylor at Cala Capital, Calacapital .Africa. Either of
And
those will
that's
work.
that's that's Taylor as in Taylor, not
Taylor.
Taylor. I'm getting tongue-tied here. Mark,
Yeah.
thank you for joining us today. As I said, I think a follow-up episode might well be in hand. And for those of you who know us, Mark's often down in Cape Town, and I'll tell you one thing: we didn't touch on his swimming exploits, but Mark's got a good 12, 15 years on me age-wise, and he's still faster than me in the pool. So I think
You were
next time we
kind to
might.
me. You were kind to me last time we swam together. You let me beat you.
Anyway, Mark, fantastic, and we'll chat to you soon.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Graham. All the best.